going to hit record as well, and then we will get started. Right. And again, as we go through this, if you've got any questions or anything, just go ahead and put those in the chat box, and then we'll also discuss those a little bit later. Let me stop sharing again. We've got too many PowerPoints up. Okay. And at the end, we'll also give you some time to come off of mute as well. So don't worry about that. If you want to ask questions with us, we're happy to do that as well. Share my screen now, possibly. All right, so talking about hay sampling first, the quiz here in a little bit, or the little poll that we're going to do at the end of the program, we'll ask you some questions. So I don't know yet how many of you all actually hay sample, but hopefully after this, if you've not hay sampled in the past, that this might be something that you'll be interested in doing in the future. So there's many reasons why we want to hay sample and get our hay actually tested for the nutrients. Livestock, actually, different species of livestock at different growth stages, different reproduction stages, they all need different amounts of energy. And so it's important for us to know what's in our hay so that we are able to make a balanced ration for them and so that they're meeting their nutrient requirements. The environment can also alter energy needs. I know a few years ago, we had a really, really wet winter. And, you know, you might think that if there's a lot of snow, that would cause some issue. But actually, you know, that wet winter, we saw a lot more issues with cattle not getting enough food. I know at the UK Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, they were seeing animals come in that were dying. They had actually a full, you know, bellies, but they were losing all the fat around them. So, you know, they might have been eating hay, but it may not have been the actual right nutrition that they needed to be getting. So keep that in mind. You know, it can play a big role, and you want to make sure that you keep all that on the back burner when you're trying to make your rations for your cattle, your goats, your sheep, whatever type of livestock that you may have. I'm looking at a cow-calf herd, and I think David or Philip will be talking about this a little bit more later. You know, at different stages, they're going to need different energy. So pre-calving, postpartum, lactating, and pregnancy, and of course gestation, they all need different amounts of energy at different times. Just looking at the list from highest to lowest, postpartum is going to need the most nutrients. Then it goes down to lactating and pregnancy and pre-calving and then gestation. There's also other factors that do affect nutrient needs as well. So the sex of the animal, is it male or female? What weight are they at? What is your desired growth of them? If you're having feeder cattle, you know, how much do you want them to gain? So all that is information that you need to think about when making a balanced ration and knowing what nutrients are in the hay that you have, so you can add that with additional feedstuffs as well. So here you can see a picture of a happy cow, and this is a list of things that are signs of animals that are receiving a balanced diet. So if they're happy, like this cow right here jumping around, but alertness, good appetite, they have bright eyes, they have a thick and glossy hair coat, they don't have any diarrhea or constipation issues, no eye or nose discharge, they're able to chew their cud, and they're active, they're, you know, playing about, walking, they're sleeping, they actually have their appropriate weight gain and able to do their normal reproductive functions. And you also want to look at if they're getting to the target range for their body condition as well. When also looking at the economic side of forages for folks, and there's a lot of folks that do sell their hay. And so this is something to look at as well as a tool for, you know, if you sample your hay, test your hay, You can use it to show the people who are buying it, hey, this is what nutrients are in, this is how well my hay is. And, you know, sometimes maybe it's not as much as what some people want, but, you know, some people, it's going to be well enough for what their needs are. So you can see that in differences with cattle to horses as well. So you want to make sure that you have something like this if you want to increase your marketing and use it as a tool. Cost for hay testing, and we'll go over this a little bit more in a video I'll show you as well. But some of the places that you can send your forage testing off to is around $10 a sample, and some go on up to closer to $30 a sample. So it's whatever preference you want, as long as it is a certified hay testing laboratory. And we'll go ahead and show you the video. I know we've got a lot to get through this evening, so I'll show you on how to actually do a hay test. So hopefully this video will help give you a little bit of an idea.
Hello, I am April Wilhoit, the Agricultural and Natural Resource Agent from Fleming County. Today we're going to be discussing hay sampling. It's important to test hay because we want to know what the nutritional value is of it so that we are feeding our livestock exactly what they need. The nutrition is based upon the hay sample that you send from your lot of hay into one of the forage laboratories. And from that information, you'll have all the knowledge you need to be able to make a balanced ration for your livestock. Or if you're selling your hay, you'll be able to market your hay based upon the results that you receive from your hay analysis as well. The first step in taking a hay sample is actually determining what type of probe you want to use. And again, this is just something that's going to be a personal preference. It's not anything that you have to do what your neighbor is doing. It's just whatever you want to do. Today you'll see here we have a couple of drill-driven options. This is a drill-driven probe that has a canister that will collect the sample inside the canister. And this one is a drill-driven one that actually has a Ziploc bag on it that you can collect the sample as you're taking it directly into the bag. Again, it's a personal preference. It doesn't matter. The things you do have to pay attention to when you look for a drill is that the probe, the diameter of it is at least 3/8 inches in diameter. You don't want anything less than that because then it can become selective whenever you're drilling into the hay and push some of the hay particles to the side that you actually want to be a part of your sample. You also want to make sure that the length of the probe is actually going to be able to penetrate at least 14 inches into the bale. So we're looking at something more like 15 to 18 inches long is where you're kind of shooting for. So you don't want anything less than 15 to 18 inches long. If you don't like something that uses a drill, there's other options that are manual and that you can check into as well. You can Google these information or you can check with your local extension office. Once you selected your probe, the next step is to determining where you're going to sample your hay. So when you're trying to determine, you want to make sure that you're finding a lot of hay. And when we say a lot, I'm not meaning a whole bunch. You're wanting to find the lot, which is the same field, the same cutting, the same species, varieties of grasses. So you don't want to have your first cutting alfalfa that came from one field mixed with your first cutting cool season grass mixture from another field. Those are two separate lots. So you want to make sure that you're sampling each lot separately. And you don't want to go over 200 tons because then you're not getting a true representative sample whenever you're taking a hay sample. So what you want to do is select your lot. And then if you, let's say you have 200 bales from that lot, then you want to be able to take samples from 20 different bales. So you'll have 20 different cores, one core from every bale. You just don't want to go down the whole line of bales though and just take one sample after another. You want to be able to get a little rhyme or reasoning with it because you don't want to be selective. You don't want to just look at a good bale and be like, hey, I'm going to take a sample from that one and not one that looks maybe not as well. You want to be able to get a true representation. That way you know exactly what your nutritional value is of your entire lot. So a good idea is to, if you have 200 bales, divide that by 20 and then take a sample out of every 10th bale. So that gives you a good idea of what you want to do. you've identified which hay lot you're going to sample first, you want to look at what type of bells you have. You know, here in Kentucky, we have many different options. We have farmers who do round bells. We have folks that do small square bells, and then the large square bells as well, or rectangular bells. It's up to you on, you know, whatever your preference is on your size of the bells. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all whenever you're taking a sample. You just want to make sure that you're sampling from the correct spot on each of the bells. So from a round bell, you want to do it from the side. And so when we say the side, you want to make sure you're doing it from where it's wrapped. If you go into the end of it, then more than likely you're going to be going into the same windrow, and that's not going to get a true representation of that hay bale and what the nutritional value is from it. So that's the reason why we want to go in from the side. So when looking at square bells or rectangular bells, you're going to be going in at the end. Again, it's going to be on the end that has some of the string on it you'll be able to see. So you don't want to be going into the same windrow by going into the side of it. So that's where you sample from. And then we'll talk a little bit more here in a minute about how to actually use the probe. Whenever I go out to take a hay sample, I want to make sure I have all the supplies I need. So we've already talked about our drill and our probe. We want to make sure we have those two items definitely, because we want to be able to take our sample. But we also want to go ahead and have a plastic container, a zip tight one that we can put our sample down into and close once we've got our 20 cores. We also need a Sharpie or some other writing instrument to be able to put the information on the outside of our bag. We want to be able to put our farm name, the cutting, the date we sampled, any other identifiable information that is going to be helpful for us in knowing which hay sample it is when we get our results back, as well as to be able to keep good records. So we can also add information on here about first cutting, second cutting, anything that's very identifiable to be able to help us as farmers to keep good records and to make sure that we're keeping things straight whenever it comes to nutritional value of our hay. Now that we've got all of our supplies, we're ready to take a sample. Just remember, we want to take the sample from the side and not the front. Now that we're ready to take a sample, we want to kind of figure out where on the bell do we want to actually use our probe. So looking at the bell, you kind of just want to use the center of it. So you want to center it from the top to the bottom and from left to right. Make sure that you hold your drill horizontally, because that's going to make sure that we get a good representative sample. Now that we've taken our sample, you can see that it's collected inside the actual probe. To be able to get it down in the canister, we want to use a plunger. Plunger usually comes with the probe whenever you order them. Or if you've broken one or anything, you can always check with the manufacturer about ordering a sample. So all you have to do is plunge it down in there. So you've collected one hay sample already. Now that we've got our 20 sample cores, pour it down into our labeled, you all would label this, Ziploc bag, zip it up, and then it'll be ready to ship. When determining when to sample your hay, you have to decide which way you're going to have them stored. Is it going to be outside, or are you going to have it in a barn or a hoop barn or some kind of tarped enclosure? It's going to really determine what you decide on how you're going to store when you want to sample your hay. So when looking at outside hay, you want to at least sample it 3 to 4 weeks prior to feeding. Don't really want to do it any earlier than that, because nutrients can change with the heating, the cooling of bales, and so you want to actually wait closer to feeding that you can. So look at like 3 to 4 weeks. For any hay that's stored inside of a barn, you can sample earlier, because it's going to have the biggest changes for it the first 3 to 4 weeks that it's being stored. So you don't want to do it any earlier than 3 to 4 weeks after cutting, but anytime after that is okay for stored hay. Just remember, if you're outside storing hay, make sure you sample it closer to feeding. If it's stored in a barn, just make sure you do it 3 to 4 weeks after it's harvested. So pretty much what we've talked about so far, we've been just looking at dry hay, but we also have folks that do haylage or baleage or however you want to say it. It's your more wet hay. That you want to sample the exact same way we've been talking about with the dry hay, but you need to also take precautions on when you are leaving the hay once you've already pierced a hole into the plastic and taken your sample. UV resistant tape needs to be used to cover that hole, so make sure that you're not changing any of that good stuff that's happening with the processes that the microbes are doing within that hay bale. So that's one of the most important things we want to remind people, is to make sure that you go ahead and have some UV resistant tape with you whenever you go out to sample your haylage or baleage, and that way you can make sure that that is secure. The only thing different we really tell people is, with even dry hay, you want to try to get it to the labs as quickly as possible. With baleage or haylage, that is even more important. If you take it immediately, send it that day, or make sure you go ahead and put it in the refrigerator or the freezer if it's going to be a day or two, because that's going to be important. And we always encourage folks to actually not send hay out, especially haylage or baleage, at the end of the week, because you really don't want to be sitting at a UPS office or something like that over the weekend. So make sure that you're trying to ship haylage and baleage at the beginning of the week, or even your hay. It's usually a better idea. I hope all of this information I've provided you today will help you in sampling your hay, whether it's your first time or if you've done it numerous times before. We hope this provides some good insight on the reasons why it is important to sample your hay, and also to help you actually know how to use a hay probe and to send in your samples correctly to a forage lab. You can select any forage lab, but some of them are certified, so make sure that you're selecting the best one for you. There's different options that our extension offices use. There's the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, there's Dairy One, and there's many, many other options. So check with your local cooperative extension service, and they can provide you more information.
Okay, and I think that probably did lag a little bit. Again, we think that's a Zoom issue because I've got pretty good internet here, and I'm plugged directly into it. So we will send out that video separately, as well as a recording for this evening. So don't fret over it. If you want to watch it again, you'll have the actual YouTube link to be able to watch the actual video. So, all right, moving right along. Get back on track here. All right, so interpreting hay test results. I'm going to turn it now over to David and Philip.
You got this, Dave?
Yes, I'm available and ready to go. If you'll run the click the PowerPoint ahead, that'll work great. Well, one thing's for sure, we've got the hay samples collected, we've got them sent off, and now you need to determine which test you're going to use. Now that we're ready to send them off, you have some options when it comes to testing. We have extremely good labs, and as April mentioned, the certified lab is what you look for. But when it comes to the test, there are different costs, and there are also different methods to be used. Near infrared spectroscopy, NIR, is usually cheaper and faster when it comes to analyzing the sample. So the sample you'll send in will be put through this infrared radiation to analyze the sample to determine the nutrient content of the forage. The other option you have is wet chemistry. This is the industry standard. This is the lab standard that we follow, and this is what the near infrared spectroscopy machines are based on. They are calculated by using wet chemistry lab results for samples. Wet chemistry is often more expensive. It is more involved when it comes to tests, but it is the most accurate, and it is one that's going to provide you more information, especially with mineral content of your forage, along with some other measures. So it depends on what you really are looking for when it comes to analyzing your forages. You want to make sure that you have the information you need. Um, Quite often, high performance animals such as dairy cows or maybe stocker calves or feeder animals, they do need a higher level of nutrition, and you may go with a wet chemistry analysis. So that's your option when it comes to testing. And when it comes to looking at the test results that you get back, there's going to be two columns that are reported, and those will be the as fed column and the dry matter. And so as fed refers to the material that you sent, the exact condition that it was in. And that means that it has all the moisture still in the sample. The dry matter is what is left after the moisture is removed. And so those will be the two measures that you first see. The moisture on top, quite often we'll see a very low moisture level on dry hay. And the dry matter, that's what's left. So those are some things you want to look at. And especially if you're pulling a sample early of a hay product and you get it back and you find out that the moisture is over 20%. If that was supposed to be dry hay and baled at that moisture, it probably means it needs to be monitored and make sure that it's not overheating. The next things we want to look at, how many, there's a lot of things that can be analyzed: nutrients, digestibility, how palatable it is, molds and toxins. Now, those are some other things that can be tested for. But the key areas we focus on and what we most often refer to would be crude protein as the first ingredient. We want to keep in mind, though, even though crude protein is at the top of the list for feeding livestock, dry or forages, energy is probably the most important nutrient we look at. So just because crude protein's at the top, don't count on it being the most important. Other things we'll be looking at is acid detergent fiber, neutral detergent fiber, total digestible nutrients, and relative feed value. So acid detergent fiber is a method of measuring the fiber in the hay, the cellulose, the lignin, and the silica. This is a digestibility of the forage and the amount of energy it provides. So this is the one that we focus on when we look for energy content in the hay. This is how much energy the animal will be able to derive from that product. The lower the number, it shows the sign of digestibility and more energy. So acid detergent fiber, we want a low number. Neutral detergent fiber is another measure of fiber, but this is the amount of fiber that's really not digestible. This will show you how much the animal will consume. So if we have a hay product that is high in fiber, such as a mature hay, the animal will not be able to consume as much. So that is a limiting factor if they cannot eat as much of the product. And if it has lower energy, they're going to have a double whammy because it doesn't contain as much energy and they can eat only a small amount. So this is going to increase it's going to decrease the amount of nutrients they get in two ways: by eating less and by having less energy. So neutral detergent fiber refers to how much they can eat. Acid detergent fiber refers to how much energy the product has. Crude protein, that is a measure of the amount of nitrogen in the forage, and it's the amino acid average nitrogen content. And so crude protein, we have quite often two measures for protein. Crude protein is total protein, and then adjusted crude protein or available crude protein indicates the protein that is available to the animal. The reason it's listed like this, often hay gets too hot. If it is put up in a higher moisture condition, the heating of the hay will cause the protein to become unavailable to the animal. It gets bound with the fiber and it basically passes through the animal without doing them any good. And so that's why we always want to look at the adjusted crude protein or available crude protein to make sure that it does have the same amount. Total digestible nutrients, it's a calculation of the forage quality by the lab using the acid detergent fiber level. And this additional measure to give an idea of the energy level in the forage. So TDN, we often refer to it as, is really a look at the energy content of the forage. Relative feed value, it's a calculation using both the NDF and the ADF, and it's a comparison of full bloom alfalfa, low in fiber, easily digested with a score of 100. So we kind of look at alfalfa as a standard and kind of give you a baseline. So if your hay is less than 100, then it's not as good as full bloom alfalfa. If it's better than 100, then you've actually got better quality hay than a full bloom alfalfa. Next. Factors affecting nutritional value of the forages. An example, alfalfa is low in fiber at full bloom and easily digestible. Its maturity at forage cutting. So as maturity increases, the tougher and harder it is to consume. And an NDF increases and crude protein decreases. So when it comes to hay quality, time of harvest and the maturity of the plant dictates everything. And so that's probably the one thing we want to hammer home tonight is if we can harvest earlier at pre-bloom or early bloom or early seed formation or prior to seed formation of our grasses, we're going to increase our nutrient content. Weeds are going to reduce the forage value. Management, well-managed fields with legumes and grass mixes can have high protein. There's windows of opportunity dictated by weather for harvesting. Rain, dew, high humidity, these all increase drying time. They're going to increase mold and toxin as we increase with improper drying. So the hay is going to be less palatable. They're not going to want to eat it. The quality is going to decrease. We're going to have fewer leaves because of those kind of problems. There's going to be less intake and they'll waste more. And we also run the risk of health problems with our animals with molds as they inhale those. Moisture content at harvest and storage post-harvest. This can cause heating. We mentioned that earlier. We've got to make sure that we avoid those bales heating up due to microbial activity. And that heating can reduce the TDN. Forage quality is also greatly reduced between days 4 and 11 for heating. After days 22, the heating of bales should be okay. But we can even see if bales are put in storage in a tight barn without ventilation and there's not a lot of airflow, this can still contain heat and be due for danger of fire. Okay, there was a test conducted or a summary analysis of 10 years worth of hay samples at the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. This was over 14,000 hay samples that were collected over that 10-year period. And Dr. Chris Teutsch, he did an analysis looking at those numbers from all those samples. Now, one thing to keep in mind, these are not your average samples. Most of the time, when we talk to producers about testing hay, their comment is, well, my hay's not good enough to test. So the majority of the hay samples that go into the lab are your better hay. And this is unfortunate because the opposite thought process should be what you focus on. We really need to know the content of the lower quality hay, because this is where we're going to make the most improvement in animal nutrition. If we have lower quality hay, this is the hay that we need to supplement. If you've got great hay, most of the time, you won't have to supplement even our most needed animals with really, really good hay. So that's something we want to keep in mind tonight is we really need to test all of our hay. But if you want to focus on particular hay, the lower quality hay or the hay that we know is not as good, that's what we really need to focus on. So this first slide looks at crude protein. You can see the minimum protein analysis, the maximum protein analysis, and then the average. This is on numerous varieties, alfalfa, alfalfa grass, grass and clover, and you can see these different numbers. One thing to keep in mind when we're looking at minimum crude protein, ruminants, especially our cows and our small ruminants, the protein content needs to be above 7 or above. Protein in hay that's less than 7 will not even feed the microbial bacteria in the rumen. And so that's the minimum we need when it comes to maintaining a healthy rumen is a protein of at least 7. So when we look at dry beef cows, there 7 or 8 crude protein percent will be enough. For a lactating beef cow, we need to bump that up to 10 to 12% crude protein. And then we get down here to our performing animals, steers, they need even higher quality protein forage to meet their protein needs. Next slide. And neutral detergent fiber, the NDF measure. This again refers to how much the animal can eat. So we've got to get the nutrients in the animal, and if the neutral detergent fiber is very high, they're not going to be able to eat enough. So we look at the numbers here, and what we want to see is a low number. And so that minimum NDF reading on alfalfa is 30. On alfalfa grass, 29. When we get into our grasses, it's going to be a little higher. Grasses have more fiber than our legumes. And so we see that higher number. When we look at the max, these are hays that the animals basically are going to fill up on, and they're not going to get near the nutrients because they can't eat enough. High numbers, 74, 75 on NDF. That's a very high fiber hay that's not going to have ability to provide enough nutrition to the animal. So those are some numbers we want on our neutral detergent fiber, is to have that lower number. And just think about this when you're wanting to compare a hay. So a good alfalfa hay has 20% crude protein, 30% ADF, and 40% NDF. And that is a really good hay that's going to get you the kind of nutrients you want for your animals. Next slide, please. Here's the ADF slide. Again, these numbers, we want the lower number to indicate less fiber and more nutrition. So the ADF average 34. You can see that kind of target we're looking at as 30 would be one of our ideal numbers, but that's average. Now, hay that's on alfalfa with a minimum of 22, that has got a lot of energy. That's a very immature hay. Where we look on the opposite end, the max on that alfalfa at 54, there's not a lot of energy left. That's probably a rained on alfalfa sample with very few leaves and mainly stem. Again, when we look over at our grasses, the fiber level is higher and there's not quite as much available energy in our grasses as there will be in our alfalfa or our legumes. So keep that in mind. Again, ADF is the energy content of the forage, and the NDF is the amount related to how much they can eat. TDN, total digestible nutrients. So you think of this again as a measure of energy, but it is a combination of the ADF and NDF, and it does have that measure so you can look at the different comparisons. Now we want this number to be larger. So the higher the TDN, the better. And that's where we're looking for the higher numbers to get more nutrients as compared to the other measures. So beef cows that are dry with a 50 TDN, that's going to meet most of their nutrient requirements. A lactating cow, though, on the other hand, is going to need a TDN of 60%. So when we look across those averages, there's only one hay, that straight alfalfa, is going to provide the amount of TDN for a cow that's lactating on a cat with a calf. And when we look at our performing animals, our young gaining animals, none of those hays in the average meet their nutrient requirements, but some of those in the maximum, they would meet those nutrient requirements. But again, that is a pre-bloom or pre-seed development forage harvested early to meet those nutritional needs. Here's a chart that kind of gives an idea on the grass clover samples in that large lot that was analyzed. And when we look at a dry cow in mid-gestation, so that minimal nutrient requirement, 80% of those hay samples met the needs of that dry cow without supplementation. Now we look at that dry cow in late gestation, we need to start providing nutrients for that growing calf, that last third of gestation. When the calf is developing quickly, we need to start increasing that nutrients available to the cow. Only 40% of those hay samples provided that nutrition that that cow needed. When we look at a lactating cow, so the cows have calved, they've got a calf nursing, less than probably 15% of the hay samples of the grass and grass clover samples met the nutrition of that lactating cow. So we better be providing supplement to that cow so she can nurse that calf to her maximum ability and not shortchange herself, or she's going to lose a tremendous amount of weight, and that calf's not going to perform as well either. When we look at our growing calves, the steers, very few hay lots in that sample of that summary met the needs of the steers. And so we're going to have to provide a lot of supplement for them to perform at that level. And so when it comes to our hay, we need to know where our better hay is, because you can see we can feed that dry mid-gestation cow some of our lower quality hay and still meet her needs. But that lactating cow, those steers, they're going to need the best hay. If it's stuck in the back of the barn and we can't get to it and we need it, we're going to have to provide a lot of supplement that we could have provided with our forage had we known where the better quality was at and if it was available where we could get to it. Next, please. And again, here's another example of the grass and grass clover sampling groups. And you see from the samples that were sent to KDA, and this is not, again, a good representation of all hay. This is just what was sent in. There was some really bad hay, less than 50% TDN. So that's not going to provide the nutrition our animals need. And then we have the bad hay. That's 50 to 55. So dry cow is going to do okay on that. But then when we get to the okay category, we're doing a little better. That's going to meet the needs of a dry cow and probably a gestating cow with some, a lactating cow with some supplementation. And then when we look at the really good hay and the good hay, those samples are much less. We're talking less than 10% of the samples that would meet those nutritional needs of our performing animals.
Hey, Dave, I'm going to put a shameless plug in here. Ladies, if Dave didn't convince you to get your hay tested and spend the $10 or $18 it's going to take to do that, if you want to play around with it, the Eastern Kentucky Hay Contest goes on in the fall. So contact your county agent to pull some samples, and you can get a free hay test out of the deal.
Make sure you check and see if your county does it. 'Cause I know we had a couple of Clark County folks on, and I don't think it goes that far west. So double check with your agent too to make sure that that is occurring in your county. It's a great opportunity. Thanks, Phil, for that reminder. All right, so next we're going to have, thank you, David, for your words of wisdom. Next, we're going to go into hay storage, and Samantha will be taking control and covering that.
Okay, so since we have talked about hay sampling, now we're going to talk a little bit about different ways that you can store your hay. April, is it going forward? Okay. So why is hay storage something that you need to consider? So we're going to talk about different ways that you can store hay, different structures that you can utilize, and why it is beneficial to store your hay inside versus outside. Okay, so sorry guys, my computer's acting weird. Okay, so first and foremost, hay losses. In research trials in the eastern United States, large round bales have been stored outside, which if you live around our Buffalo Trace areas, you know at any given point you may drive down the road and see hay that is stored outside, just stacked on the side of the field or by the barn or where the cows are. So it is often stored without protection for 6 months or more, which results in a dry matter loss of 80% or even higher than that. So some factors that may affect outside storage losses are the bale density, climatic influences, site selection, bale orientation and placement, protecting the tops of the bales, and also protecting the bottoms of the bales. So here is a very informative chart that just shows the system life of the round rolls in the different ways that they are stored, the approximate cost of that, and also their dry matter loss. So you can see at the top, we have a conventional shed, which has a system life of 20 years. It is the most expensive at $5 per bale per year, and the dry matter loss is 4 to 7%. However, you can see down the chart that a pole structure with a plastic roof, a reusable tarp, bale sleeve on the ground, and also plastic wrap on the ground also results in a dry matter loss of 4 to 7%. If you go down to the very bottom, you will see what we just talked about. That stacked on the ground hay that has no protection, no cover. It is just stored outside. So you can see the only cost associated with that is the twine, which is 75 cents per bale per year. But the dry matter loss is 25 to 35%. Up from that is net wrap, but once again, it is stored outside on the ground. It goes down to 15 to 25%. And then above that is elevated stack on a pad. So that's just filter fabric with rock on top of it. And that dry matter loss is 13 to 17%. So there are several ways that you can store hay, and these next couple slides are just examples. So this first one is a repurposed dairy facility. This is in Robertson County. It was the largest dairy in the county at one point, and whenever the farmers quit milking, they sold this. And as you can see, the new owners have turned it into hay storage facilities. Okay, next is an old tobacco barn that is in Fleming County, and they did something really cool with this. So me and April went and took hay samples, and they have taken the center poles out of this barn so that they could get their equipment in there more easily, and also stack large square bales. So if you all can see the truss system they have at the top, it has been completely repurposed, and they have done this with all of their old tobacco barns. Next, we have hoop barns, which many of you all probably see. There have been several pop up throughout our counties. Thank you to the cost share program. But for many people, this is an easy way to store your hay under shelter. They are pretty cost efficient, and as you can see, they come in different sizes, and they are mainly used for round rolls. Next, we have sheds, which may also be called pole barns. You can store round rolls in them. You can store square bales in them, small squares, large squares. These have also been built in the counties, and they serve the same purpose, just keeping that hay under shelter. Next, we have tarps. So with the tarps, you can do it two ways. You can stack the hay straight on the ground, or you can use wooden pallets to stack the hay on, and you just throw that tarp over and make sure that it is anchored to the ground on all sides, so that you prevent as much moisture from getting in there as possible. Okay, so there are some considerations for hay storage that you need to keep in mind. So the first is size and capacity. How big do you want it to be? How much hay do you want to store in it? Structural considerations. So again, that's your hoop barns, that's your pole barns. That's if you have tobacco barns on your farm already, renovating those may be an option. Cost, that is a huge thing to consider. Ventilation, so we want to make sure that you have a good airflow in there. And fire prevention and tractor safety. So next we're going to talk a little bit about fire safety. So what causes hay to heat up? Microbial activity and moisture are the main factors, along with the presence of oxygen, that cause hay to heat up. So what happens whenever you have moisture and you have heat in a barn full of hay? So a lot of people think of mold. It's the first thing they think of whenever you think of moisture and hay. You also have your loss of dry matter, which, as David said, is very important. And lastly, it's a fire hazard. So there are several ways that you can test the moisture and the temperatures whenever you stack your hay. So the first is a moisture meter, which is a probe that measures the temperature and the moisture. Just to keep in mind that temperature display is not always available on all meters. And also you have a limited probe length. So it is important to check in multiple spots around your facility. Okay, so as you see here, we have this thermometer that has the critical hay temperatures. Get them all pulled up there. So 130 degrees, and this is Fahrenheit, is within normal limits. Temperature should decline and continue to check daily. When it gets up to 150 degrees, that is too hot and it's likely to get warmer. You need to move the hay and create more air circulation. Check the temperature frequently. If it gets even higher to 180 degrees, fire is imminent or nearby. Probe other locations, notify your fire department, and move hay when the firemen arrive. If you get up to 200 degrees, it is dangerous. Fire is present. Call the fire department. Expect flames when you're moving hay. So hopefully no one gets to that point. But it's good to know those temperatures and the ranges that they fall in. Okay. So, April, do you want to talk about the thermometer?
Yeah, I'll talk about it real quickly. And Philip can chime in on this as well. So in your packets, you all had the very long probe. And then in your little plastic bags, you should have received a thermometer and a string. So the purpose of the do-it-yourself forage thermometer is to put the string through the thermometer, little hoop on the end of it, and then you would stick the thermometer down inside of the metal tubing. And that way you'll be able to check the hay temperature in a stack. We will share a video on how to do this. We won't show it tonight because we're low on time. So we will send that one out with all the other information from tonight's program as well. So we will move on now to our next speaker.
While you're moving on, April, two things. One, that's not a very fast process. When you put the probe down into the hay, it's going to take a while. It's not going to be real instant. The other thing you need to be very careful with is inserting that tube that you don't break your thermometer. If you do, those are spirit filled, so we don't have to worry about heavy metals like mercury or anything like that. And the third thing you need to worry about is you need to download an app on your phone or have a calculator real handy, because that thermometer is in Celsius. It goes up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but you'll have to do a conversion so that makes sense in your head.
I did put in your all's packets a little paper chart that shows the conversion too for Celsius. So you can also check it as well. All right, on to I think David and Philip again.
Okay, we want to just touch base with you again on another option when it comes to forage quality, and that is your certified versus non-certified seed. Quite often varieties actually have improvements in forage quality, and we're often going to see that in the more expensive, but even the certified varieties. So when it comes to certified seed, it costs more. I mean, there's no doubt we're probably going to see double the cost of what the cheap seed would be. So certified seed provides an orderly means of maintaining and making available to the public a good quality seed. High quality seeds and propagating materials of superior plant varieties, so they're grown and distributed as to ensure genetic identity and purity. Kentucky certified seed must also meet minimum standards for germination, mechanical purity, and freedom from certain diseases and troublesome weeds. So there's lots of information on the certified seed tag, but that's it in a nutshell, is you know what you're getting and what you're not getting. You're not getting weed seed. You're not getting the noxious weeds. You're not getting disease seed that's not going to germinate as well. It's got certain requirements on there for germination tests and when they have to be done. And so that's what we're paying for with certified seed, is the assurance and the quality of what you're buying. Next slide. Actually, certified seed is governed by law. It's in accordance with the Kentucky seed law, and it's a KRS law. So you can see that right there. The director of the Agriculture Experiment Station, the University of Kentucky, has designated Kentucky Seed Improvement Association as the official seed certifying agency for Kentucky. So, you know, we hear you can buy cheap red clover called common seed. it'll often have a name Kinlan on it. But when we plant that, it comes up, it looks great, but it only lasts for about 1.5 years. But if we go back to certified Kinlan, that's one of our better improved varieties. We have that pure variety. We know the foundation that variety came from. What we see in the difference is it will last 3 years. So you plant them side by side the first year, you think, oh, I saved all that money on that seed. They're just the same. Let's do an example. And these aren't current prices, but this is just an example. And quite often what you'll find, common seed costs $2 a pound. We're going to seed 8 pounds per acre. Cost is $16 an acre for seeding. Certified seeds double. Why would we want to spend double on the cost of seed? It's going to cost $32 an acre. That's going to add up over time. You know, if you do a lot of acres, an increase of $16 an acre. But if we look over time, those additional years of production, or that time period, is going to yield 3.3 tons more grass or more forage over that time period versus the common seed. Let's just say that hay is worth $120 a ton. That is $405 over the life of that stand in extra hay. Now, if I see $16 savings in seed cost or an extra $405 in forage, that is easy math for me. Next slide. Okay, if you still think you're going to just buy that cheaper seed, most of our cost share programs, you have to use certified seed. Certified seed will not have problematic weeds in it. And that's a concern. I mean, we'll have a lot of new seedings out there and somebody will say, you know, gee whiz, must have had a lot of weed seed in there. Certified seed must meet germination standards, and there are time limits for germination tests. The longer we keep seed, especially if it's not in a controlled environment, it will lose germination ability. And so that's why there's a time limit on the certified seed and its germination tests. If it expires, it has to be retested to meet those standards. So the take-home message, the more expensive certified seed will make you money. Cheap seed will cost you money.
All right, so we're at the end of our presentation. Does anyone have any questions right at the moment? You can come off of mute or you can put it in the chat box. All right, I will share too real quick with you all the forage variety trials. That way you can kind of see what it looks like and know what the numbers mean. So hold on a second. And then in the meantime, if y'all got questions, go ahead and come off mute or put it in the chat box.
There's a question that came up, the cost of hay test. You can have your hay tested at the Kentucky Department of Agriculture for $10 per sample. We also utilize Dairy One, which is a lab out of New York. They have both the NIR and wet chemistry available there. So the minimal cost with shipping is like $23, and it can go on up from there to $30. And then there's many tests you can select from for extra cost. And it just depends on when you're going to be feeding that hay. If it's going in storage, you can test it right away. If it's going to be outside stored, you may have to wait closer to the time to feed.
You want to wait at least 2 weeks after it's been through the bale, though, to give it time to get through that heat cycle.
All right, so here is the publication on the long-term summary of Kentucky forage variety trials. So whenever David was talking about certified seeds and that kind of thing, you can go in this publication, and this is in your packet. And you can see different varieties of different species. So this one here that you should see on my screen is sideways, so it's a little hard to look at, but the clover, that's for white clover. So the different varieties there. And then you keep going down and you'll have, this one's for red clover. And then we have alfalfa. So about any type of forage species you can look at. So when you're looking at the chart, let me see if I can turn this around so we can look at it instead of looking at it on its side, and it will not let me rotate it. So that won't work. But anyways, if you look at your printed copy on this side, you can see on this very last line, there is these numbers here, and you can see like the top one's 96 and then 83 and then 101. So whenever we do recommendations on varieties to folks, we usually give them this publication and encourage them to use any of the varieties that actually have over a 100. So 100 or better means it's a better performing type of seed. So that is just a tool for you to use if you're wanting to seed, renovate your pastures, or just seed again. You've got information in this publication that can help you determine what type of varieties. So is there any other information, Philip, David, Samantha, you all have to share on that?
No, other than if you look at those and are still confused after tonight, give us a call. We'd love to sit down and talk with you and kind of go through it and make sure that you understand clearly what you're deciding on.
There was another question in the chat box, which is the best time to plant hayseed. For grasses, fall is the best time. Sometime between August 15th and September 15th is the ideal window. They seem to do the best, and they don't have the competition from weeds. We want to plant our legumes, clover. We prefer actually doing that in February and frost seed that. You can also conventional seed it, but we don't lose a year of the stand if we plant in the spring with clover. And also alfalfa is preferred to be planted in the spring. In that way, it's not susceptible to a disease, a fungal disease that some fall seeded alfalfa can get.
Becky, that's not a weird question at all. Poison hemlock is a big problem. Dave, do you agree about now, as long as it's growing, but particularly in February, we get 50-degree days consistently. We start getting some active growth. 2,4-D does a really good job of knocking that plant in the head. Now, it is poison from seed to mature plant. And for the most part in pasture fields, cattle will avoid it if they have other options. However, if you do decide to spray that, make sure the cattle are not in the field, because you actually change the chemistry in that plant and make that plant become desirable.
And I did share here on the screen, hopefully y'all can see it. It's the broadleaf weeds of Kentucky pastures. This publication, I can send this out to you all as well, but it's AGR 207. This can give you some ideas on when to treat to get rid of weeds, and also which herbicides are, how they fare, you know, if they're doing a good job or not. But like Philip said, ideally when dealing with any type of weed, the smaller, the better. So if the weed is, once it gets very tall, it's going to be harder to control. So ideally you want to try to get it when it's you know, young and actively growing. You're going to have your better chance of control at that point. Not saying it's 100% effective, but you're gonna have your better chance of control at that point. So just keep that in mind. And hemlock is growing right now, poison hemlock is, and also it grows in the spring as well. So keep that in mind.
I'd just like to say one thing about storing hay. It's highly recommended that you not stack round bales in a barn for 2 weeks. I know we really like to get the hay out of the weather, but if there's a place that you could get an under roof before it's stacked up, leave space between the bales, that's going to allow the moisture in that bale to migrate out to where it is stable before you stack it. But if you can avoid stacking hay for 2 weeks, you greatly reduce the risk of fire.
Non-chemical approaches on poison hemlock. Dave, are you aware of anything? I don't know much other than it's going to be an uphill battle. Keeping it from going to seed, but odds are that seed bank is already there, and it's going to be tough to get control of without chemicals.
HOE herbicide.
Yeah, and I guarantee you that will never have resistance. You may have trouble finding something to fit your hand, but it will never be weed resistant.
Okay, any other questions that y'all might have? Okay, well, if you be thinking about some more questions you might have, I'll go ahead and let's see, put out the final poll here. So if y'all can just take a moment to complete this poll, it will help us with planning next year's and also getting an idea of how this year's went as well, Farm School for Women. Also, while you're all completing that and thinking of any last minute questions, we just want to thank you all again for joining us for the Farm School for Women program. Hopefully next year we can get back to a face-to-face type of approach to it instead of over Zoom, so you can see things hands-on and be able to do things hands-on as well. But of course, COVID put a little kink in that again this year, but we greatly appreciate y'all being troopers and joining us each session. We're a little bit over an hour right now, but we've been trying to keep it to best to an hour as possible. I also want to thank you to all the folks that worked hard on this program and got the videos taken and presentations completed and everything. So big thanks to David Appleman, ANR agent in Bracken County, Samantha Warner, ANR/4-H agent in Robertson County, Macy Fons, she's a horticulture agent in Mason County, and she's not on tonight because her old boy's trick-or-treating. Fleming County does have trick-or-treating this evening. Philip Konopka for he's an A&R agent in Lewis County, and then we had a guest appearance on the video that we didn't get to show this evening, but I'll email it out to you all. His wife Rebecca Konopka, she helped with the thermometer video as well, and then Dr. Rachel Rudolph. You all got to see her last week. She's our specialist at UK that talked about the high tunnels and low tunnels with us last week and was on that video. So I want to thank everybody who had a big part in making this happen for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it and can have some information to take back and use on your farms or in your gardens or wherever. We also will provide information to you all about each of the sessions. I'll go ahead and send out an email. It may be tomorrow, it may be Monday, with the links to all 3 sessions. I'll go ahead and send all that information again, and I'll also send all the publication links that I promised you for this evening, and the recordings for each of everything as well. And we'll also include in that email the probe winner. Whoever attended all 3 sessions, you'll get your name put in the hat to win the soil probe. So I'll have to run a report for tonight's session, and we'll get all that done, and we'll try to make a little video of it so we can share that with you all as well. So any last and final burning questions you all got from any of the sessions, we're happy to help answer as many questions as possible here before we jump off.
Hey, Becca, don't think you're going to find that fire is going to be a real efficient way of doing it. It's really tough to burn green stuff, and then it really doesn't get down to the roots. The other thing, once you do get control of that, make sure you come back and you seed something down that you want. Mother Nature is pretty particular, and if you don't, she doesn't like bare soil. So if you don't put something down there, she's going to do it. And it's kind of like your mom had always told you, you get what you get, you don't throw a fit. So if you don't want what she's got to provide, make sure as soon as you get the weeds under control, make sure that you get down what you want. And that's the best herbicide that I could ever recommend, is a good, thick stand of desirable forages. Janice, about the hay temperature, about how long to be accurate. And I'm going to give you the good extension answer, and that depends. Usually the hotter the hay, it will come up faster. I'm going to say 30 minutes to an hour, and then check it, come back another 30 minutes and make sure that temperature stays constant. If it stays constant, then that's where you need to be.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. If you do find out you have any questions after this evening, again, we encourage you to always reach out to your local cooperative extension agent. We're always happy to help either get the information to you or point you in the right direction of where you need to go. So thank you all again. I'm going to close the poll down in here in just a minute. But other than that, I think we're finished, and we greatly appreciate y'all. And we hope you have a good evening and a great Halloween weekend. Enjoy these cool little weather. Have a great one.